So I'll go ahead and introduce Stephen and then let you know a little bit about his background. So Stephen Stromp is the author of Stukent's Market Research Essentials courseware, and he's the co-author of the forthcoming Business Research Essentials courseware, which is being worked on and will be launched later this year. Just super exciting. He's the Executive Director of Market Intelligence and Strategy at Davenport University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Stephen is also an adjunct instructor for a variety of courses, including marketing research, business research, strategic marketing, and consumer behavior. We've been super lucky to work with Stephen over the past couple of years. The courseware that he's authored is really unique. We'll definitely post a link to that courseware. You can actually get free instructor access to check out all of it. That Jace just posted in the chat here. So make sure to do that. And you can have a walkthrough with one of the representatives here at Stukent. But we're really lucky to have Stephen here discussing his session today. So welcome, Stephen. Go ahead and take it away.
Well, thank you. Let me first make sure that I can share my screen. Thumbs up if you can see the screen okay. Okay, well, hopefully I don't hear anything, but hopefully everyone can see the screen here. But hello and thank you for coming to my session. I hope that you found it okay. I know that there was a schedule change from Tuesday to Monday, so I'm glad you're here and glad that you found it. So just a little bit about my background. Thank you, Adam, for the introduction. So I am a research practitioner by trade, and I'm also an adjunct instructor teaching marketing and business research. So I am, as Adam said, I'm also the author of Stukent's Market Research Essentials, and it has been really great working with Stukent and getting to know many of you over the last couple of years. I put my LinkedIn path here so you can find that and connect with me on LinkedIn, and I've had a lot of great friendships and conversations through Stukent over the years. So that has been awesome to make those connections. So hopefully that continues. So, and as Adam said, I think this is the first time we've ever really talked about or announced that there's a new book coming out that will also include a bit of the topic we're talking about today, which is survey design. But that book will approach research from the perspective of how managers use data to make business decisions. And that one will be called Business Research Essentials. That's coming out in October, so I'm sure I'll be back to talk with you about that then. So I'm excited about that. Let's go ahead and talk about kind of the mission of where we are at today. So I kind of changed what I wanted to talk about a little bit. Actually, I expanded what I wanted to talk about because I decided to talk about some of the trends we've been seeing in survey research over the last few years and leading up to our most recent climate. So mostly the changes, what are we seeing in survey development? What has impacted survey development? So then I also want to get back to my original topic of helping students with survey design by kind of giving them those best practice lines of questioning for common types of surveys. And I think that's really important to set them up for success. And I've seen that in teaching my courses. And then I want to mesh these ideas together. So I know it may seem a little like two presentations put together as one, but there really is a point to it. So stick with me and I'll bring it home. So I want to really mesh these ideas together because I do think we need to keep both in mind when teaching survey design. So I promise, again, it will come together in the end. And then finally, after meshing these ideas, what does it mean for survey projects in our research courses? How can we maybe shift that a little bit into making sure that we're keeping up with the trends? So before I get into it, I'm hoping I can see the text box somewhere in here. But before I get into it, if you could, I'm going to do a very informal, non-technical poll. So if you could just type in the chat box, I'm wondering if you teach a research course, do you run a survey research project? And maybe what is the focus what do you like to focus on with that survey research project? Like, is it new product development? Is it advertising? Let's see if I can't see the chat here. So Adam, if you can unmute and let me know if there's anybody typing, that would be helpful to see.
Yeah, we've got a couple of responses here,
Okay, cool.
Stephen. So they're all saying, yes. Marina said, yes, I do. Michelle says, yes, a sustainability question. Yes, again.
Okay.
Usage behavior topics. Cati said, yes. And I run a research project. Each student has a real client they create a survey for and do analysis.
Cool.
Kelly says, I don't teach a research course, but I try to incorporate market research in my other courses, which are social media and IMC. And then Heather says, I will teach it for the first time this fall and want to incorporate a project.
Okay, great.
That's
So I
all.
think that's a really good mix, and it sounds like a lot of you are incorporating research surveys, and I think that it is crucial to run a survey research project in a market research or a business research course, because surveys are still the #1 form of primary research. It's just that over the last couple of years, we've seen surveys evolving, and kind of that's what I want to talk about today is how do we incorporate this in this evolving survey methodology so that students have the latest and greatest. But that was really interesting to see kind of what you're working on, and that most of you are incorporating surveys into your projects, which I think is great. So what are the trends? So like I usually do when it comes to survey research, one of the things I do is turn to Qualtrics, because they are one of the leaders in the survey software development for sure. They have probably the leading in that we're using in higher education. I use it in my day-to-day world as well. And I did turn to them because I've been seeing some trends myself, but I wanted to kind of confirm some of the things I was seeing. And lo and behold, they have some great resources that are kind of research on research, what's going on in the realm of surveys. And it led me to 2 reports that Qualtrics had put out. So you can Google these, you can go to their website and grab them. I think they're even great to show to students. So it's kind of, again, their research on research publication. So check these out. They're very short reports, and they're not bad documents to go through with your students. But they did a report on what are the 2020 market research trends, and then looking back, or 2021, and then looking back to 2020, the year that changed everything, kind of what started some of these trends that we're about to see today. So let's get into some of these observable trends that we've seen. So the first one, and I think we've all seen this a little bit through the pandemic, is just the prevalence of what we're calling stackable surveys. So we start to see longer surveys being broken up into smaller surveys and dispersed over time. So I think the key here is that second bullet, that each component, in order to what we're calling a stackable survey, each component is learning from the prior component. So it's not as if the survey is pre-designed all the way through from the beginning. It's really learning as it goes, and you're designing the survey questions as you go through the process. So in fact, each segment of the survey is being crafted after the prior segment results are actually analyzed. So for example, with COVID, perfect example, and this is probably why this is on the list, is that you can see how this might work well for a crisis, or while surveying in the middle of something that's going on. So we actually did this at our university to get sequential feedback from employees and students. We wanted to know how satisfied they were with the pandemic, or with how the pandemic was being handled for our students. Like, how effective was it when we switched to online? So that's kind of a satisfaction component, right? But also we wanted to know what resources they needed going forward, and how do we change these things on a dime as we're getting the feedback. So it's like we're almost collecting some qualitative information along with the quantitative, but then in the next iteration, we're firming that up and making it quantitative, some of those ideas that we gathered from the first iteration. And so what's kind of different about this is it's done very fast, right? So if you're in the middle of an ongoing where the climate's changing in an ongoing manner, it's definitely being done over the course of, instead of like months of a survey project, this is like days or weeks, right? You're kicking these out, you're analyzing it, developing a new survey product and putting it out there. So of course, this approach requires quick analysis time. There were some folks that did this in-house at our university, and I'm sure this was going on throughout all industries, right? We saw a lot of communications and feedback forms and things like that. But again, this is an example. It's done over a period of time. But what I think was interesting about this outside of the pandemic is, for our students, I think perhaps we can see implications here that we can learn going forward. So perhaps there's an emerging market, and maybe something like delivery services, which we've seen explode. So if you're developing that as a service for your industry, you might use an approach like this to really fine tune what you want to ask over time, rather than doing a giant survey and throwing like a nebulous survey with 100 different components in it. You might kind of slowly release it and customize those segments as you're going forward. So it's kind of a continuous learning approach. So I would say this is a potential student survey research project. You could do a research project on how would you break this survey up. And if you're doing something like where you have experiential learning project where you're actually giving this to real students or to a real client or a real database, this could be something that you could potentially work with depending on the research objective. But at the very least, I think we should acknowledge this in our classes as you might not just have a survey that you put out there and it's a one and done. There's this stackable survey method that we've really seen take off recently. The next one I wanted to talk about was multi-channel surveys. So here we're also breaking up surveys into smaller parts, and we start to see this is really a theme in recent years, right? One question surveys are now the norm across a lot of platforms. Attention spans are short, everything is mobile. So it's difficult to to send folks a super long or potential respondents a super long survey as we may have done 10 years ago. So this is where we get to the next part, and you might think this is a little disjointed because later on in the presentation I'm going to show you the components of those traditional surveys, but I promise we will address that in the end. How do we rectify having these best case practices of these long surveys by topic, but our methodology is telling us that's not how things are done anymore, right? We really need to talk about that and rectify that. So back to the multi-channel, these are used for gathering a picture of the topic from more than one market segment. So we see a lot of this in the field, and a couple of days ago, I just went onto YouTube and I knew one was going to pop up, whatever video I watched. And lo and behold, this is the one that popped up. So here's one example of a one question survey. This is a brand awareness question posted before a YouTube ad. So it's about tax software. Sorry, it's a little boring. I was hoping for something a little more exciting, but it was the first one that came up. And I don't know any of these tax software brands, so I would actually click none of the above. But this is an example of doing this across multiple platforms and kind of pulling it together at the end when things are a little more holistic. So I think the key here is getting a more holistic picture from all of your market segments. So if you think of a brand study objective, you can ask a more general brand awareness question on YouTube, but you will also likely need to know how your loyalists feel about a brand. And maybe you can get that from YouTube if you really target your survey, like you can target advertising, right? But probably not. You probably will have a list of your brand loyalists or a sample that are more appropriate for those types of questions. So, and again, just as with target advertising on social media, you can choose, I mean, you all know this, but students need to be aware that just as marketing, you can give a survey and choose, the demographics, psychographics. You can target surveys in this manner, but we also need to be conscious of the question length and the types of questions that are appropriate that dictate that segment. How close are they in proximity to the brand is going to dictate what questions we ask and how many questions we can get away with. So for instance, I'm not going to run through a list of key brand attributes with respondents unless they have some affiliation with us or maybe they're a loyalist to the company. And to be honest, I think this is innovative because when we run a brand study historically, I haven't seen too many custom surveys that look at the general market, look at your potential market, those who might be in the market for what you're selling, and then current consumers. So I think we used to do that all in one large brand survey and just call it a brand survey, right? That just gets tossed out to the same sample. So this is for sure a more holistic approach that definitely lends itself to better segmentation of your market. So the next one is Omni Channel. So omni-channel listening is very similar to the previous one, which was multi-channel. But what this adds into it is the social listening data. And so you might say, well, that's not survey data, and you would be correct. But it could certainly inform a survey research objective, and you could almost see that adding snowballing into some of the stackable survey research, right? But I think this is interesting because in many organizations, it's sort of a split where social listening activities fall. So I think in many organizations, this is done in the marketing or communications departments. In fact, in the last couple companies I've worked at, I have not done this as a research function, which I probably should be, but it's been falling under the marketing, in the marketing area. And some of it is in the research area. So because of my job title, I assume I'm really starting to get a lot of emails lately, sales emails from the company Synthesio, which I put their logo up in here, which is a social listening tool. And they give insight on online conversations regarding your company. You're probably familiar with a lot of them in the marketing world. Ranker is one that our library purchases, so I have students use that a lot. But it just gets me to thinking with this omni-channel listening that we could tap into that and kind of pull that into inform research development, but also add into our reports that don't have to really be survey reports, right? They can be a little more holistic in terms of where we're getting the information to address a research objective. So what they're really doing with the social media listening, and you can see there's a little demo there to the right. What they're really doing is they're taking qualitative data and they're quantifying it. But I can also see as a way, depending on the research objective, to kind of fill in the gaps where that traditional survey research cannot. So I think that's interesting, kind of combining those two. And then finally, automation. We've been hearing this buzzword forever, right? And it's really happening with survey research, but the more I dig into it, what they're really meaning is automated reporting and real-time feedback, right? So it's not so much survey development, although they kind of mean that a little bit. So as you can probably sense with me, there's a little caution with this one, because as we know, real-time feedback could be dangerous because you don't have a complete sample yet. So I'm always hesitant. That's my old school research coming in. If you don't have a complete sample, what we usually get in a survey is the first parts of the survey come in, and you either get your customers that are angry or your brand loyalists that are your cheerleaders, and you don't get a lot of that middle point. So you could really skew your results if you just look at that data and make decisions as it's coming in. So that's a caution that I think we should teach students as well. And what's not automated, although it's certainly getting easier, is identifying that proper sample and survey development. So I've hired Qualtrics to run surveys through their online panels. And so for me, it kind of feels automated because they're doing it through their online panels. But I really have to keep an eye. I have to get reports, every other day to keep an eye on that demographic representation. So deployment is not really automated. Survey design isn't either, although when you go into these survey tools, they pre-populate a lot of the questions, which I think is fine. We just need to be careful about what we're picking, but they are embedding more and more, so it's kind of drag drop even the questions that you might want to ask into the survey software. So we've seen that. And that brings me to the automated reports. So I do see students sometimes running into problems using those automated reports. And I keep going back to Qualtrics, but I know the other survey systems, they have those kind of either canned reports or reports that you can pull. But I do see sometimes students running into problems. The default statistic in those or the visual is not always appropriate. So when I look at the results, I'm like, no, we do not need a line chart for your data is not time series. Why is there a line chart in your report? It doesn't make any sense. So we have to really be careful in teaching students the proper data visualization because the default doesn't always work. And students should recognize that. We need to teach them and train them so that we're not seeing those types of reports. And one thing, this is probably a little bit of a tangent, but one thing that always bugs me about Qualtrics is, and please contact me on LinkedIn afterwards if you know how to fix this, but the charts on their scales in their reporting always starts at 0. So if you have like a 1 to 5 Likert scale, it starts at 0 instead of 1. So I always tell students, yes, this is misrepresenting the data. This is not what is taught in the textbook, but we're using their reporting function, so we just kind of ignore it. But in the real world, we don't really use the Qualtrics reporting, or we usually pull that out, run our own statistics, and clean the data, run it, and do our own data visualization because of these things that I've been talking about. So we just need to. It really depends on your course, which direction are you gonna focus more on the data analysis or the reporting and kind of those strategic implications, because sometimes you can't get to everything. So anyway, those were the trends, and I think the main takeaway here is that these should be introduced to students as trends, especially as we see the evolution of survey deployment. We need to keep up with that. It's not always a traditional giant survey that we send to a dedicated sample. So with that in mind, let's put that aside and move on to the second portion, which is the what do I ask portion. And so this is a real photo of a student of mine. No, I'm just kidding. But it could be because, and I titled the presentation, What Do I Ask? Because that's a phrase I often would hear from students with much exasperation. Because we teach them all these tools, right? We give them all these survey design tools that we teach them, and then we give them a research project, whether it's a real world client or a mock project, and then I go to review their survey, and it's often like the most random questions, and I'm like, how did you develop this from this research objective? This is not really going to get us what we need. So after years of doing this and frustrating me and the student, I finally realized it's really not the student's fault. They really need to be guided through the learning, and they need to know what are the common components of these typical surveys. So we're not really throwing them too many curveballs in terms of, at least I don't, in terms of what the research objective is. Now, you could get some far off research objective if you're working with a experiential learning client, but typically they fall into similar molds. So I've been developing surveys for about 20 plus years now. So obviously it's not going to be as natural to them as it is to me. So I had to give in and say, I need to give them some tools to work with here. I just can't say, go craft a survey. I feel like I've taught you all these skills, now go do it. It's a little daunting and complicated. So the first thing is, yes, we still do need to teach all of those survey design best practices. Here are the items that I like to cover with students before even turning them loose to design questions. So we still need to do this. They need to know things like, what should the survey length be? What should the flow, what is the natural flow for this type of project where we're not biasing because we're putting certain questions above others? We need to know, what are the pitfalls? What are all those bad things that a novice falls into, like writing double-barreled questions, which is a common one, having ambiguous questions or loaded questions or things like that. But just covering all these best case practices, and of course, how to do your response options, and how do we scale a question. So these are all things that I always start with, and they need to have that playbook before they can even start crafting a survey. But what I've really found over the years is there are a myriad of different research objectives. But again, like I said, there are some core surveys that we run over and over and over, at least in my world. And I work a lot with marketing department, like all the departments. I've worked in healthcare, higher education, working on marketing, branding, internal like satisfaction type stuff. So these are the kind of the core survey types that I have that we've run over the years. And so what I've done is I've kind of collected a repository of all these studies and look for some commonalities in how we ask these questions, right? So if you're using Market Research Essentials now, you'll be familiar with these surveys and the examples that are in Market Research Essentials that fleshes all these out, and your students can use them. And in the latest version, it's actually pulled out of the chapter and put in its own student resource. So you will have access to these because it's starting to grow, so that they can have that as a separate piece. And you'll also notice there's a new one. So a new one that's available in the latest version that was just published last week is the advertising concept survey. So this is a brand new line of questioning that was added that I'm pretty excited about, because this has always been my favorite one to run in the real world. I've worked with a lot of marketing agencies to pull together kind of like an ad testing repository. So I love it because I get to work really closely with the marketers and really impact the creative of that advertising while it's still in development. So I'm excited to have that as a new update. So that's just a new piece that we have. So anyway, this is what I teach. So I teach the students that first these are the main portions or main sections of each of these surveys, and this is the general flow of each of these surveys. So for new product development, I teach that we first gather a brand read. So how in general does your company compare to companies in the new product category that you're intending to enter, if it is a new product category? And then go into the features. So rating which features of this new product or service are most desirable. Then we have the open-ended questions asking about, okay, well, what other desirable features that we forgot about in our list should we be rating? And then finally asking about the intent to purchase the product and the product concept and pricing read. Then if we move over to brand perception, we generally first want to gather, general awareness, their top of mind general awareness, and then aided against a list of competitors. So which companies have you heard of in this, type of industry, what others, and then from a list of competitors, see if they can see how they rate you in terms of awareness. And then we want to know, how would you describe the company or service unaided? So that's kind of our descriptors there. And then of all the surveys, this is the most qualitative in nature because we need those top of mind unbiased thoughts, right? So there's a little bit of work on the back end with all the open-ended here, but the close-ended piece is gathering ratings of your key brand attributes. So basically, what do we own, quote unquote, own in the market versus what we think we own or what we say we own. So this is a strong advertising or marketing type survey. And then satisfaction usually has some overall indicator of satisfaction, usually at the top or bottom of the survey, such as, would you recommend us? How would you rate your overall satisfaction? And then also includes service components. So, and the service components, just not to drive the respondent crazy, usually flow in order that they unfold naturally, right? So if we're doing something, we want to make sure that it's in a natural order that the service unfolded. And then we also want to gather, well, what worked well and what could be improved. And then finally, the new survey, advertising concept survey, it's going to be very similar to brand perception, but it's a lot more pointed in their questions. So the way this is developed is you would first show, and you can do this online with mock-ups and things like that, show a mock-up ad, digital ad, TV commercial. We want to first gather their impressions, such as what was the main message of this ad, and then what I call favorability ratings, such as relevancy and understanding of the message. We also need ads to stick out, so questions about uniqueness, and we need ads to fit the main brand. So, questions about fit. Does this make sense with this brand that we're talking about? And then also action indicators. So, will this entice you to click on the link or visit the store or find out more? And then if there's room, kind of testing those brand attributes again, which you may or may not have room for in a survey like that. Now, to be clear, advertising concept is different from performing those A/B tests where you already have an ad developed and you want to see which version is more successful. So these surveys are more for your high stakes ad, ads, ones that you're not sure about the message to begin with, or you don't want to fully produce it because it costs a lot and you need to know which direction to go in. So I think these surveys may be a particularly good fit for a marketing research class project where you're really interested in the marketing and advertising components and want to fit this into a class project as particularly maybe a mock project. I think that would work particularly well. So let's get on to I won't read through all these just for sake of time, but you have access to these and the actual courseware has these fleshed out, which in a little more detail, just for sake of putting them in a presentation. I didn't include the response options because we're not going to have room. but they are available in the Market Research Essentials courseware in full in that resource, that student resource, which is also an instructor resource. So kind of you can see how does this flesh out? And this is what I can kind of give students as their question bank. What makes sense in terms of including these in a survey? So, you know, your brand comparison, you know, we're going to ask about perception of quality. How likely would this company create a quality product? We ask about features. And then into the purchasing and pricing. So these are just some general questions that students can get an idea of how to phrase things and get those put and make sure that we have each of those major areas that are to the right here covered in that survey project. So again, for the next one, this just goes through each one. So for brand perception, we want to ask about awareness, familiarity. What are those top descriptors? How would they top of mind describe? What are those words and phrases? What makes this company unique so that they can position themselves in the market? And then also, you know, going through what do they own in the market? What do they think they own, and get a rating on, you know, what they really do own with question 5 there. Satisfaction. So like I said, satisfaction, we want to teach students that just to keep the participants so they're not confused, is to go through, that's why I have the arrow there, is to really go through what are the steps, either, you know, in any type of experience. It could even be an online purchasing experience. What are the steps of going through from A to Z so that we can, you know, hit on those touch points in order and get some ratings there. Throw in some overall ratings, and then throw in, you know, how could we improve? What were those opportunities for improvement? And what did we do really well? And then finally, for advertising concepts, so for this one, you know, we want to gather what's the main message. So this is, again, a lot of the top of mind after they first are introduced to a stimuli. What's the main message? What sticks in your mind? What catches your attention? And students don't have to use all these, and they may come up with their own spin on it, but these are just some places for them to start. So we can then go through to the bottom, thinking about, you know, does this fit? Is it believable? And those action indicators. So does it impact your likelihood to do some type of action? So so again, I give these examples to students sort of as a question bank to craft their surveys. I give them the high level components they need to cover, but then also the questions and some of the response options, which we have in the courseware. And just doing this, I believe, has really increased the comprehension of survey design, and also gives them the tools that they can use in the workplace. I've actually had students say, I've actually taken these resources with me to my job, and I use them all the time. So that was awesome to hear. So you know, being able to use these in real world situations. So to kind of wrap it up and hopefully leave a little bit of time for any Q&A or discussion is, so what does this all mean, tying this together? So some of the trends, and then some of the best case practices for survey research. Well, I think we still need to teach survey design best practices. That kind of goes without saying, right? But I'm also a firm believer in giving students some appropriate questions to use for common surveys. We really need to have them have a toolkit so that their results are also meaningful. And I'm also a proponent of developing surveys in iterations. I think I said this last year, is give them a chance to do a few drafts, right? And then if they're not crafting a solid instruments, send them back to the question bank or back to the textbook, so that you know, they're not just looking at the objective and then crafting a survey that's not solid, right? So we give them these tools, but we have to hold them to, you know, obviously using those tools. So what is more implications is, I think we should, on top of what I just said, incorporate some of these latest trends into your survey research project. So this is where it's kind of new, right? So for example, one way we could do this is take a line of questioning, you know, that I've just showed, but then have a project or an assignment where the student starts delineating, where does it make sense to get this information or ask these questions? So it might be for a brand perception, in my example here on the bottom, that some of this comes from social media, you know, a survey on social media. Some of it comes from social listening. Some of it comes from a survey directly to category users. And then we kind of pull that together in a more holistic approach. So we could have them develop a survey data collection plan, like you might have a research plan, right? Which might have multiple methods. Well, maybe we have multiple survey collection methods within a survey, within a survey project. And also incorporate those non-survey items to help address the research objective too, which some of you may already be doing. And so finally, some of you already, like I said, some of you are already doing this, including like secondary research where they're Googling things or going to industry sources. And then some of you are doing focus group projects. So you could also include you can include some social listening, but include that in a final report, perhaps at the end of the semester that includes all of those. So typically in the past, I would just have them focus on their survey data, right? But pulling that in from other sources and focusing on the research objective could be a way to incorporate some of these trends. And finally, just my soapbox with automated reports, proceed with caution. So depending on the class, this may be where you want students to get some exposure to actually pulling the data out of the system. So transforming some of that raw data into a data set that they can actually analyze. And those are for instructors or courses where you really want them to dig into the data and learn about data transformation and making sure that they're analyzing it properly with the proper statistics. But in other classes, you may want to use these automated features some more, but we just have to pay attention to teaching, again, that proper data visualization. So we're not doing line charts on, single collection data points. So that is really all I have to share. I know looks like we have 10 minutes left. But I'd love to hear if you're already incorporating some of these trends into your courses or your your projects, and if you already use a question banks as a best practice or not. So thank you for your time.
Awesome. Well, that was a great presentation, Stephen. I know that I learned a lot. Thank you so much. It was awesome. We have a bunch of questions from the chat while you were presenting, so we have a lot of good things to discuss. Before we started with the questions for Stephen, I did want to take a second and just make sure that everyone had the opportunity to check out the market research courseware bundle that Stephen is actually the author of the courseware, and we have a new simulation that bundles with that called Mimic Market Research. Which is very unique, and it's really cool to be able to get your students to have hands-on practice with things like building surveys and looking at quantitative and qualitative data, making critical decisions. So we'll put the link there in the chat. Make sure that you get access to both the courseware, the digital textbook, and the simulation, and you can check that out. And I did see a comment just asking about if there's product training. And to answer that, there definitely is. Please schedule a demo. You'll see on that page, schedule a demo button. If you click that and fill out the form, someone from StuKent will be with you shortly. You can book a time on their calendar and you can get one-on-one walkthroughs of anything that you would like. So make sure to do that if you're looking for help. Awesome. Well, we'll hop into the Q&A then. So the first question we have is if you do not have access to a subscription to a social listening app, any suggestions on what to try, Hootsuite or Hubspot, or do you have any preferences of what you like to incorporate in your class, Stephen?
Sure. Like I said, I do not do the Synthio, if I'm pronouncing that right. We use Ranker, and I think that has a free option. There is a free option through I know that our library may subscribe to that and give us a free option, but you might want to look at the free option for that as a social listening tool. It was let me go back to that slide here, if I can find it. It's Ranker, R-A-N-K-U-R, but I'd love to know more too. So if others in the chat box have other options that they use for social media listening, type it in there that are free resources for students, because that's the one I use. But again, you may have I may have free access to it because our library subscribes to it, so I'm not sure.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll have to make sure to check that out. Next question. What textbook is the most used nowadays in marketing research classes?
Which textbook?
Yeah, and we know that you're the author of the
Yeah.
Market Research Essentials courseware, so you might be a little bit biased.
I might be
know that I'm
biased, but
too.
I doubt mine is the most used. So I'm not sure. We switched to, my institution switched to mine to Market Research Essentials a couple years ago. Before that, we were using like a McGraw-Hill one. I'm not sure, but we did end up switching to this. And I think there was a period where we were kind of using like nothing. It was just like pre-designed courseware that we didn't feel was sufficient. That was in the course. But yeah, other people could answer that too. But we've been using this for the last 3 years at Davenport University. So, but I don't know if it's the most
I saw
used.
someone also mention Pearson's textbook, but maybe to give it a little bit more, I guess, of an overview of what the differences are. What's different about
Okay.
like your textbook versus McGraw-Hill and Pearson's? Would you say?
Yeah, so I think I followed the Stucant way, the Stucant model, right? So when they asked me to write this textbook, it was very much, we want to know what students could use to take immediately in the workplace, and so strip the things out that they would not be needing in the workplace, so we can focus on what's important to get them up and running. If they were to use this courseware and go into the workplace, what would they need to do? So I think, kind of the Stucant model is, and it fits with our university. We're a very, our university motto is get where the world is going. So everything must lead to a career before it's a program that we have. We're a business, health, and technology school. So it fit really well. So, with kind of my discipline and where I'm coming from. So I think that is the difference, is it's really practical. So you can see from, just going through looking at the survey examples, all those examples are in there for students to use. So the goal of it is to be a super practical textbook that they could hit the ground running in, either, going through marketing research, any type of discipline that needs to incorporate research in it, whether it's a research role or not. They would have the fundamentals to kind of hit the ground running.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely agree. Concise and practical is what a lot of students are asking for now. Great. So here's the next question. Where do you get the bank of survey questions that you were discussing earlier?
So what's interesting about that is I've been in research for probably 25 years now, and I've worked at a consulting firm. I've worked with automotive, higher education, you name it, all different types, consumer packaged goods. And so really it's just what I have used over the years, and I've kind of kept my own repository of each of these types of surveys, right? Because they come up time and time again since I was working at a consulting firm, and using those so they're not from any one source, really. They're basically what I have learned over the years, what works well within each of these industries, or within each of these types of surveys. So, students could do this too. You don't have to use that question bank. If you just like Google types, within different surveys, you might be able to find a couple good examples. These are just ones that I've used over the years. And also, what I think is important too is the flow of the survey. What makes sense for placement in a survey? Because we probably don't want to be asking, about key brand attributes, or about for like a brand study. We probably don't want to be given that key brand attribute list first before we give some of those open-ended questions. So those are things that I've thought about before I put these together, is, what's the optimum order of gathering this information, so we're not biasing, so there's no order bias into the surveys.
Sure. Yeah, those are really good tips. Thank you. Here's the next question, and it's a good one. So it says, I recognize that your topic today is on surveys, but wouldn't qualitative research lend deeper insights on topics such as brand perception and advertising evaluation? Or is this another trend towards less qualitative research?
Oh, I don't think so. So yeah, that was just my topic today was surveys. I kind of focused in on that, but especially in the textbook, there is a whole chapter on qualitative market research, and focus groups are a huge part of that. And, especially gathering online focus groups. So no, not at all. And in fact, when I teach a survey research project, I really probably shouldn't call it a survey research project. We do a comprehensive project within my courses, and it's also in the courseware too, where you start out with, and it's also in the simulation, right? So the simulation that the market research essentials simulation, or mimic market research, I'm sorry, has where you first start out with your secondary research. You get a research objective, you start out with your secondary research, then you go into your qualitative primary research based off of what you've learned from your secondary. And then that leads into going more quantitative. Let's firm this up and make sure that we can be a little more comfortable with what we're seeing by quantifying the information. And then we go into survey research. So yeah, I think they're all important. I don't think they're going away, but certainly the way we're collecting that qualitative data is changing, like with online focus groups, social listening, and kind of incorporating that into a more holistic way. But for sure, that's not that piece. I don't see it going away. I still see focus groups being conducted. It's just done in a different manner than it was 10 years ago. I've not been to a focus group where I've led a lot of focus groups, and we used to do it where we'd rent out the facility, it'd be a whole thing, and we'd have like the two-way mirrors and all that. I have not been to one of those in years. So
Yeah, it's pretty unique to be able to simulate a focus group. I was a part of the video shooting for that that we put in the simulation, and it's really going to be a valuable experience for students. I remember organizing focus groups when I was in school, and kind of bribing students to come get some Little Caesars pizza to be in a focus group. And it wasn't always a great experience trying to do that, but it's definitely important for students to get some sort of focus group experience if they want to go into market research.
yeah, right. So yeah, it's a whole different skill set, teaching them to those open-ended questions, right? It's like, don't ask a dichotomous yes/no question, going through the moderator's guide. And so in the simulation and in the course project, it walks them through how to do that within the courseware. But yeah, it's also, what's really cool about the simulation is someone guides them through a moderator's guide, and you actually hear the responses. So there's two parts of it: crafting the moderator's guide, but then also being able to pick up on what you're hearing are trends within the conversation. And so that's a piece that I think is unique to that simulation for sure.
Yeah, definitely. All right. We probably have time for a couple more questions here. So when is the next update being offered for Market Research Essentials? I know it's coming up soon, but
I was just told 2 days ago that it's live now. So if you go, which I'm super excited about because it has a bunch new stuff. It has 50 new quiz questions that weren't there before. It's now 10 chapters instead of 9, but please don't freak out because they're in the same order. It's just kind of blown out a little bit, expanded. So it's live now. It's if you go into purchase or select, and you use the drop down, it's the May 2021 version, and it's brand new.
Awesome. Well, that's exciting. Okay, here's the last question for you, Stephen. Is it still worth it to discuss CATI surveys?
Oh, Cati surveys.
Cati. Okay, yeah, I wasn't sure on that.
Yeah. Wow, I haven't heard that term in a while. So back in the day, we used to do those all the time. Like we'd have them on floppy disks, and do the surveys that way. I'm sure they're still using a form of that for telephone surveys. So and telephone surveys they're still doing them, especially for like B2B type stuff. So I'm wondering, I don't know exactly what software they're using now. Back in the day, I'll probably date myself, we were using CI3 type software, but we do talk about that a little bit in the book, more around telephone surveys. But I bet they're using the same web-based interface for telephone surveys as they do for online. So it's just online surveys have just taken over, telephone surveys, except for certain, markets or hard to reach populations. For sure that's still a thing. So I think it's still worth talking about. It just might be more of a footnote, as time goes on.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Stephen. We really enjoyed your presentation, learned a lot. Looking forward to checking out the new updates in your courseware. And we really appreciate your time. Thanks for being a part of ProfCon.
Hey, thanks for having me. And again, like if you have any additional questions, I'm on LinkedIn, and feel free to reach out.
Great. Well, thanks, Stephen.
All right.
Bye. Bye, everyone.